for all this length of time. Because understand, I was actually a professional, not just in blackjack, but in poker.
Hmm.
So I held the belief for, or at least tried to toy with the belief that the earth math was going to work and that my skill at gambling by itself was enough to give myself an edge over time and continue to do it. But it was because of that that it allowed me to learn the complexity of gambling astrology and become the gambling astrologer that I am today. And I learned
Hmm.
so many secrets. The luckiest people I know, um, they don't they don't have the pressure to ever really have to question their reality, and there are people like that, you
Hmm.
know. So anyway, I've rambled on long enough. There's kind of some of my story in
No, I'm
parts.
fascinated. I mean, well, how have you found astrology? Obviously, you found it helps you. How would you say that it's helped you? Because I know we go through phases where um, maybe we shouldn't gamble, the unlucky
100%.
phases, you know?
100%.
I'm coming out of that myself where I just knew not to even bother. I had so much Saturn and Neptune on me, but I'm coming out of it at least. And maybe, but I
Well,
also feel like I was learning something at that time that I needed to learn.
Well, there you go. There's a okay. So if if anybody in your any here does any gardening, you don't go out and harvest in the middle of winter.
Right.
And so we know that because we understand the seasons and we understand the cycles. Well, we have the same kind of seasons with our psyche, and you're exactly right that with wisdom we come to understand that there's a phase for everything, and even what we would look at and say, well, this is a shitty transit. Pardon me, kind of how I talk. Because you know what, a lot of these new agers, they talk about, oh, there is no good and bad transits, and that's bullshit. There is bad
I
transits.
agree. There are bad ones.
And when my background was Jungian early on, and I really studied, and I'll tell you a story that these are the kind of stories that really fascinated me. The story that really started getting me into astrology was when I first started practicing astrology. And this friend of mine came up to me. I was kind of doing them in a doing readings in a coffee shop. She came up to me and she said, "Well, how come how come I'm an Aries and what is it about Aries and Virgo men? I mean, we don't get along. What?" And I said, "Well, that doesn't have any. That's sun sign astrology. It goes much deeper than that." And I was still learning, but I had gone deep and understood the complexities and the calculations to say, well, let's play with this and see if we can come up with something.
Hmm.
So I started looking into her chart, and I mean, this is so long ago, and I'm talking about 30 years ago nearly, but I found a time when what was interesting was all three of these men had birthdays within 3 days. So the nice thing about that is that we were able to come up with a commonality of a degree.
Mm.
And obviously that tells us that she was sensitive to a particular vibration. That's all it
Hmm.
is, a sensitivity to vibration. Well, why was she sensitive to this vibration on a deep past life soul level? Not particularly sure, but I found a time when this degree was first triggered, especially by her progressed moon, and I asked her about that time, and she was just dumbfounded. She said, "That very week you said my father left my family, and I never saw my father again."
Hmm.
So then we looked at her father's. She remembered her father's birthday, and lo and behold, her father had the moon at that position of Virgo. So basically, the thing was is that what was fascinating to me about astrology was I was learning about recognition of vibration, and that we are drawn to vibration at particular times when we're being triggered. And you're right. I mean, the reason I'm telling this story is because it showed me the depth of what we can understand and learn. The value that this person got when she came up was learning that there was an association with all three of these men and the abandonment that she had with her father.
Hmm.
I had another one that was a little harsher where I was paid to do a chart for a guy that was a total skeptic. He didn't believe in astrology, he thought it was funny. but he thought he would humor me and give it a try. I looked at his chart, and it was obvious that um, he had some heavy, really heavy, what looked like it could have been, was most likely sexual abuse around the age of 8. And the reason being that there were 8 degrees between a collection of squares that involved Mars, Pluto, and Saturn,
Mm,
all in the fourth and the seventh house. And of course, if you use primary directions, you understand that not just solar arc theory that would shift the planet 8 degrees and make them exact right around the age of 8, but also through primary directions, when you're progressing a chart 4 minutes a day, the mundane position of the uh, planets move back and align into an exact square at the age of 8 for this particular person. So anyway, as the story goes, I there was a there was an alignment. There was basically there was a transit coming up for this person that was 8 months ahead, and and I remember looking at it and saying, next February, all I didn't know how to address it. I'm not,
mm-hmm,
I wasn't at the time a professional counselor.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so I didn't, but I tried to address it as delicately as I could. It was obvious he was defensive about it, didn't want to talk about it, but I just needed to warn him that I hoped that he could ground into a level of forgiveness and understanding of what happened the coming February, because all that energy was going to well up from his unconscious at that time, and that he needed to be prepared.
mm-hmm.
And he laughed it off. And then that February came around, and my friend that paid me to do the chart went home early for lunch and found that man molesting an 8-year-old in the backyard. And he
Oh my
went to
God.
prison on that day. And so he was abused at 8. That's what we were seeing. I was seeing astrologically. And that kind of gives you an idea too of this question of fate and free will with astrology. There is free will with astrology, but what is fated is that we are going to experience the karma inherent in the complex. And so if we look into the past and see what happened in the past, and we know that a complex within our chart is being triggered in the future, we can know that we're going to deal with that life lesson. We know we are going to deal with that life lesson that is going to affect us energetically 100%, but
Mm-hmm,
we can become conscious of it through astrology. Astrology is the language that allows us to become conscious of it. And so, luck works much the same way. It I know it sounds like a big leap to go from that dark story to luck, but a lot of times, we deal with simple nature of self-worth and value.
mm-hmm,
Um, my eighth house moon, how, the unconscious value. Uh, and so when a complex is triggered, I may unconsciously draw to myself um, I'm less value through being simply misaligned with the collective uh, value, collective force.
mm-hmm.
The remembrance or reincarnation of feeling unvalued by my father, by my mother during those particular times when I couldn't communicate my more evolved, more spiritual nature as a young soul growing up, and the disconnect between that. I mean, I have Saturn and Gemini in the 12th house, and I have it square the midheaven.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's a lack of support there from the external sources. And I had to learn to be my own source of support and really learn how to figure out and navigate myself through the maze of the unconscious, which astrology measures. It measures
Mm-hmm.
when we're aligned and when we're misaligned. And so that's the nature of gambling. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is that we're looking at individual charts and trying to see what your particular sensitive spots are, what your particular relationship to value is, what your particular relationship to luck is, and we find your lucky spots. We find the spots that where you won't be so lucky. We avoid those and we exploit the good stuff. We exploit the good stuff.
What
That's
would you
what we're doing.
say are, what have you found to be, say, a lucky transit or configuration? What do you think goes into those lucky periods in a chart? What are you looking for?
Well, I look for complexes in the chart. I especially look for um, planets that are making um, good strain-free, maybe sextile conjunction trines to the angles, to the midheaven, to the ascendant. Um, I know people that have like charts that you would look at initially, and some people might think conventional astrology might think that's not a very lucky chart, but they've got everything flowing so well with the angles that it just manifests on Earth a particular way. And that's all that really matters when we're looking at gambling astrology. But it all depends. I I've had periods where I've had amazing Jupiter transits, but I was having terrible luck because other transits were anchoring it down or bringing it far down. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you got to look at the big picture. You got to look at your progressions, your secondary progressions. Your minor progressions are going to be most important for day to day. I'll give you a recent example of one that I was actually I've got a wide orb Saturn Venus square, but I've had a lot of karma with it, with Saturn and Venus. I even had a daughter that I raised as a single dad that had Saturn Venus exact square, and she had Saturn on my ascendant.
Hmm.
So it was what was my point? So in my minor progression, there was a day that Saturn and Venus were exact to the minute conjunct, or I'm sorry, in exact to the minute square. And I was planning a trip to go out of town to gamble, and I avoided that day. And I had some better stuff coming up later in the week, so I decided the next day, now that the tension of the square had passed, I decided to leave to go take this trip. The mistake that I overlooked, because there's so many variables. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to. I mean, you really got to pay attention to even the Sessa square, the Sima squares and the Sessa squares. 135 aspects and 45 aspects are
Really?
a killer. Yes, especially if it's by Saturn, Pluto, Neptune, um, Uranus to the personal planets like the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you've got, for example, if you have per, like a progression of Uranus and it happens to be making an exact to minute 135-degree aspect to your natal moon on a particular day, I don't care if you may have all sorts of, you may have Jupiter in good spots. All the stuff I'm saying is almost useless because it all depends. I mean, there's other variables it depends on. I have a trine between the moon and Uranus in my chart, okay? And I
Mm-hmm.
have the moon in Aquarius, so it's under the moon and Saturn's rulership. And I have it in a grand trine with Saturn and Uranus, so it's kind of nice. But that allows for, let's say, a 135 aspect from Uranus in the example I gave to be not quite as um, it wouldn't be quite as intense as, say, a person that had a Moon Uranus conjunction or a Moon Uranus square, or a Moon Uranus opposition. If they were born with tension between the planets, then a transit or a progression that's going to create strain is going to have more of a karmic impact. It's going to create a lesson that there's going to be more tension surrounding that particular lesson than a person that doesn't have that aspect. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah.